For the artists, for the passionate. Welcome to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. Alright, hello everyone and welcome back to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast, or welcome if it's your first time. And today is, this one came around quick, let's put it that way. Somehow, this is the 1 year anniversary episode, already. Yeah, I've been podcasting for a year, as of when this episode releases. Which is kind of insane. I mean, probably almost exactly a year because I did have a bit of a backlog before I released the first episode, but yeah, it has officially been a year. This is the 1 year anniversary of the Adventures Elsewhere podcast, and I have had some listeners that have stuck with from day one, and I have to give the biggest of thank yous to you and to anyone else who has joined me on this slightly strange place that is the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. And today I want to take a sort of past, present and future approach, much like I did with the anniversary of the prompt hosting episode, and there's going to be another one of those coming pretty soon, which is insane. But let's keep talking about the podcast, and let's talk about how this started, because it did come out of nowhere at the time, and it did, honestly, for me too. Because at the end of the day, I sort of tried to do, on Twitter at the time, because that was really the only social media I was using, I tried to talk a little bit about deeper themes and the more complex parts of writing, complex subjects and world building and all of that, and it just... Twitter was not the right format for that at all. And trying to have it all written down and everything, I just thought this doesn't convey properly at all. And I thought about how I could do that and how it would all work. And for a while I thought, shall I just write a whole massive lore book around that? And keep your eyes peeled for that one. But I didn't want to have to keep that all under wraps because I did want to talk about it and I did think it was cool, and releasing some sort of big lore book when you're only, potentially 2 books into the term and wonder before one's even come out just makes you look like a wanker. And yes, I'm pretentious, but that's an entirely different line that I don't really want to cross. At least not yet. So, thinking about it, I thought, well, I had a really old YouTube channel that, I hadn't updated in probably 3 years at that point. I thought, why don't I just podcast it on YouTube? Make videos or podcast it or something, and in the end I settled on a podcast rather than full-on videos, because I hate video editing. I can't stand video editing, it's as simple as that. So here we are. It seemed like the best way to properly get across what I wanted to get across sort of uninterrupted as well. That was a big part of it, was not wanting to be interrupted and misinterpreted in the same way. And yes, I know people leave YouTube comments 2 minutes into the video going, oh, you missed a bit, and it's like 28 minutes left on the video, my dude, watch it. But it's easier to do that than to write a 30 tweet long thread that no one's going to read. Something like this I think is better for that. But that's not the only reason I started this podcast. this one is a little tricky to mention. And what I'm going to do, I think, I might cut that out. I'm going to leave this section unedited so that you can hear why I started this podcast. The real reason I started this up is because I have a speech disorder. And it was starting to really, really affect me in my professional life at this point, because it was getting worse. And I thought at some point I need to tackle this. I can't keep living like this, because it's affecting not only my personal life, it's starting to affect my professional life, and, you know, it is tied to mental health, basically, and the fact that it was getting worse was affecting my mental health in other ways and making all that. Basically, I was on a really bad spiral, or at the beginning of, so in the middle of, and I thought, well, how do I combat this? And the only way I could really think to do it was, okay, well, I forced myself to talk. How do I do that? And in what capacity do I do that? And I thought, well, I know at the heart of it where a lot of it stems from, so let's just face it head on. You know, that just seems like, I guess, the most efficient and most effective way of doing it. If you're going to do it, go the whole hog. And, you know, talk at length about my creative projects. You know, talk about them, not, you know, talk about it on Twitter, you know, actually physically talk about it. And have the pressure of an audience so that you actually keep doing it. So you're forced to stick with it, you're forced to do it, because at the end of the day, somebody is listening, even if that's just one person. And if there's one thing I hate doing, is letting people down. Yeah, maybe not the healthiest approach to what is effectively speech therapy, but it's worked. It has. It's been life-changing for me. It really has. I'm not trying to say, oh yes, I did this thing, and, you know, I came up with it myself, and I'm such a genius, and look how much better. And I'm like, genuinely, I'm better. And this is something that I can actively measure by podcasting, because in the first ever episode, which I daren't link you back to at this point, but genuinely during that first episode, I could barely record it, like at all, because I paused at least 3, probably more like 7, honestly, times for minutes trying to regain the ability to talk. And, you know, nowadays, I cut out, you know, silences that are longer than a certain threshold to, because some of that, most of the time now, that's sort of thinking time, or, okay, let's just wait for this plane to fly overhead, because there's noise filters that I use now, but they don't cut out everything. And also it's just distracting. But I also cut out silences when it gets difficult for me to continue, and I'm just not really having to do that much or in the same way anymore. And the reason I've left this section completely unedited is so that you can you can hear what I cut out. And I did sort of question whether I really wanted to do that. Whether I really wanted to leave this section unedited and be that honest about it, I guess. But if I'm going to talk about, this whole thing, I don't see any reason why I shouldn't. Do it properly would be my view on that, especially given that, mental health month has, been and gone. I believe that's May, ? I'm not very good at remembering all the different months, to be honest. There are a lot of them at this point. But I know that July is Disability Pride Month. But, I wanted to do it properly and show it properly because I know that, I'm not alone in having the issue that I have. It's something that does actually come up on page in my writing because Ai Nagashima has it. But it's not something you hear or see talked about because it's difficult to understand. And also it's not just, physical speech. Sometimes it does pass over into the realm of just communication, full stop, non-verbal and, over text. And, one thing I have worked on over many years is getting better at non-verbal communication, making that clear so that I do have alternatives, and I like to think that I am very good at that now, and generally speaking, people do seem to read it pretty well. But that's not always good enough. So, this podcast has been my way of helping myself. And it has worked, and yes, it's still incredibly difficult to talk about that, and it's incredibly difficult to cover certain topics still. And I don't really want to get into the detail of that because I do think that's a little too personal for my uptight ass, but I wanted to be honest about that. So let's move on at this point, because I don't have much more to say about that. Let's move on to something that is a bit more fun. I want to talk about Unreal Engine with this podcast, because I think one of the reasons I really felt able to do this podcast was seeing the Shadowspark podcast launch, because that's something I listen to a lot. It's good fun, recommend. And seeing what that was like in a podcast that, was about writing, but, not just, let's analyse a query letter this week, and, let's actually talk about writing and have it be, fun, and all of that. And one thing I really noticed with the Shadowspark podcast immediately was that they had a really cool intro, and I was like, it was visually really nice and all that. It's like, I want that. I want an intro that looks that good. And I didn't really know what I wanted. So I thought, well, how do I make really great visuals? What tools do I have for that? And I thought, well, theirs is animated. I'm not animating in GIMP. I'm not doing 2D animation because no. I mean, I'm actually getting back into that now and having quite a lot of fun with it, which is maybe ironic at this point, but that's not something I wanted to do at the time. So, and I have iMovie as a video editor that I use for this, but the stock footage in that is very clearly stock and not what I wanted at all. So I thought, let's give Unreal Engine a whirl. And I like playing with VFX and Niagara. That's all a lot of fun, and I already knew that it was going to be Adventures Elsewhere, because that is a name I've used for things for a while at this point. And I've always liked that, and I do think it encompasses a lot of what I do, because elsewhere has other connotations, at least to me, than just, somewhere else. There's more of it. There's more to the word elsewhere than that for me. But I wanted to have something sort of not ethereal exactly, but something quite sort of open to interpretation, mysterious, I guess. And I sort of settled on the idea of having sort of something semi-space themed. Because it's out there. Yes, that's really kind of the reasoning behind it. But I also wanted purple because I like purple. Simple as that. Really, it's a colour I wasn't really using for anything else, and it's one of my favourites, so I thought, I'll go with purple. And using Unreal's VFX, I came up with some particle systems I really liked that was just using hanging particulates and a few different colours. So there's some red in there, there's some blue in there, there's also some gold in there. It's harder to spot, but it's there, and you can see that in the outro as well. I dare you to spot it. And I had hanging particulates for the stars and the background layering all that and rendering it, and that was a lot of fun, honestly, to do. I hadn't done anything quite like that with Unreal, and I'm really proud of how the intro looks, and it's not something that I think is going to change. There might be the odd occasion it changes, but that's for later in the episode. Some changes I would like, though. I would like to do more interviews, and I know a lot of that comes from me reaching out, and I have not done anywhere near enough of that. I've not done anywhere near as much as I want to, just because every single time I've thought maybe I've got some time to do that, something else has come up. Latest example, moving house. Like every single time. But that is something I really do want to do more of. I really do want to do more for the community with this podcast. I've also thought about talking about some slightly different subjects with my writing, so doing more about, deeper themes in my writing, and maybe some stuff about how I handle tropes as well, because yes, I have a problem with the word trope and how everything is labelled as a trope now, but there are some that recur and some that, I do get a lot of pleasure out of thinking about, and some of my favourite tropes and things like that, and I think that would be quite fun to talk about. Historical events is one I've thought about talking about as well. I've actually done a couple of episodes, so fairly spontaneously at this point, about marketing and analysis. So, I did the whole right to market, what people see that to mean, what it should actually mean, why people are dumb, and, but thrillers are harmless. No, they're not. And I did an episode about craft books and how that basically means your books are shit. But I'd like to potentially do some more stuff around that, just because I really enjoyed doing those episodes. I found them a lot of fun. So that's something that I want to do. And changes I've made throughout this first year of podcasting is, I started doing the soundbite teaser reels really early, actually, thinking about it. And I'm not always great at keeping up with those when, the backlog gets too small and things get a bit tight, and I'll be the first to admit that. I know I haven't necessarily been the best about that, and I'm still experimenting with that and how exactly that works, how doable all that is, and obviously doing the big AEP graphics as well. I haven't used in a long time at this point, actually. It's like Amusing, Earnest, Peculiar, The Adventures Elsewhere podcast. I had a lot of fun with those. But that stems from... This has been a subject that I've been nervous to broach. Thrills and chills. I have alluded to them, and they're nonsense on this podcast before. So basically this is a word of warning. Just avoid thrills and chills. They're not nice people. They have a problem with you if you don't like craft books as much as they do, basically if you don't worship them. Like, that is genuinely a problem, to the point that actually they decided, now let's fuck over Jade and her podcast after saying we'll support her, which is what spurred me on to do the sound bites and the graphics. But I'm gonna leave, just like, there's no reason to get involved with people like that, and they're all so desperate, you know, oh, query this and query that. Well, I got a publishing contract before all of them. And this is why I get so worked up about craft books, because they were so desperate to jam them down people's throats at any opportunity, but, well, who got the publishing contract first? I mean, there is a whole set of screenshots that I have, and a whole load more to that drama, but I'm not going to include it in this episode, because that's not what I want this podcast to be. I don't want this to be just bashing people, no matter how shitty they are. I don't want that to be what this podcast is, and I don't want it to just be about bashing things. When it comes to taking on, you know, terrible writing advice, like write to market, or, you know, just follow craft books, when I have tackled those subjects, it's not just been about bashing people, it's been about, well, let's analyse that, let's break that down, let's think about that, and come to our own conclusions. You know, it's an actual thoughtful discussion about, well, maybe actually there is a point to craft books in, you know, this very niche area, but, you know, the sake of cat be shit is bullshit. That's what I want this podcast to be, that when it is, you know, more negative, which is not what I want, that, you know, there is proper thought and proper discussion and debate. It's not just bashing people, it's not what I want. But it's a writer beware, to me, to say, just avoid thrills and chills. They're not good people. It's actually another reason I founded the monthly thrills prompts, was so that there was somewhere else for writers of dark literature, because there was nowhere else at the time. Be the change you want to see. But talking of community, I alluded earlier to Adventures Elsewhere being a name I'd used for a while. Adventures Elsewhere does have some other things to it. So AEP is Adventures Elsewhere podcast. But I have some other Adventures Elsewhere things. So there is AEA, which is coming later this year. I am not going to give you exact details about what that is at this stage. There will be a podcast episode about it close to the time, so keep your eyes peeled for that. But this is something that is about the indie writing community and celebrating the community. So make sure you keep your eyes peeled for that, because that's something that I think is going to be really fun. There is also AES, which is in very early concept stage at the minute. I have big plans for that, but it's a lot of work and a lot of logistics, honestly, and trying to figure out exactly what that means and how exactly that would work. That's something that I haven't been able to sort yet. That's pretty low on the priority list, but something, again, you want to keep your eye out for. But that's not the only one. Not the only two. There is a third. There is AEG. And this is something for quite a long time in the future. But there is a little behind-the-scenes peek available on my Pinterest. And if you want to check that out, that is Jade_Blank21 on Pinterest. And there's a board on my Pinterest. I'm not going to tell you exactly which one, because where's the fun in that? But it looks somewhat out of place. Do with that information what you will. It wouldn't be the Adventures Elsewhere podcast if I wasn't being pretentious. I should do that as a new AEP graphic, shouldn't I? I should have the P as pretentious at this point. I reckon I've earned that. But yeah, 1 year of the Adventures Elsewhere podcast already, somehow. And I'm going to be honest, I wasn't sure I was going to make it this far. I wasn't convinced I was going to have enough ideas, even, when I was getting really close to this mark. I was like, is this going to have to be the, I've been doing it for 1 year and I'm hanging up my boots because I got nothing more that I want to talk about. Especially with not getting interviews, which is my own fault. But I really wanted to keep doing it because of how much of a difference it's made to my life. And I really can't overstate how much of a difference it's made. But also because I just enjoy it. And it's not something I expected to enjoy. I gave myself an audience just for the sake of sticking with it. But I do enjoy talking about things with my writing that you can't really necessarily talk about on the social media platforms in the same way. I get a lot out of that. I'm really glad that I have made it this far. And I've actually got a whole raft of ideas for future episodes as well. And, I've got a list of people I want to interview and all of that stuff. There's more to come. And I think it will only get better. I'm particularly excited for AEA. And that will be coming. Honestly, the first announcements about that, when will that be? A few months away? You want to keep your eyes peeled for that. Trust me, it's going to be a lot of fun, and it's going to be going out across all of my socials. And there's going to be a sort of explainer on here, but I might do something more on here for that too. It might be like an actual edited video. Wouldn't that be a bit of a shocker? I'm not going to guarantee that because, as I said at the beginning, I hate video editing, but keep your eyes peeled for that. And when I say across all my socials, I mean all 3 other platforms that I'm on. So that is primarily, mostly, I'm on Twitter. That is, the writing space. That's where my thrills prompts are. That's semi-live updates on my writing and little ship dynamic retweets, and I'm trying to do more for the community on Twitter at the minute as well. That is JadeBlack21 on there. If you want to give me a follow and maybe get involved in the prompts, all genres are welcome, if they dare. If you're looking for the home of the podcast, where you'll get advance notice of what the episode for the week is, and soundbite teaser reels when I remember to do them, and potentially more stuff around the community as and when I experiment with content on there, Jade_Black21 on Instagram. And if you're looking for stuff about exclusive art and stuff about world building, where you can see sort of what the places I write about look like with carefully curated image selections on different boards, and potentially a peek of what AEG is, check out my Pinterest. I'm Jade_Black21 on there. And, with all this talk about interviews, if you're published or on the way, get in touch. My email is on the screen. But before you do that, take note. There is a list of things I need to know in the description. Please include that in your initial contact. It makes everything a whole lot easier. And also, Indie and Self-Pub. You're the people I want to hear from. It doesn't have to be a new release. It doesn't have to be out yet. I'm happy to do things for pre-orders. There's no genre restriction, no age category restriction. It doesn't have to be a novel. Novellas are very welcome. Anthologies, poetry, whatever you've got, bring it in. Let's see what we can do. I almost feel like I should have a new sign-off, given that this is the 1 year episode. Well, I think at the end it's fitting to say, again, I know I said it at the beginning, but again, thank you so much to everyone who has, been part of this, whether you've listened to one episode or every single one. You're new, you've been around, the entire year. You've just been supporting me on social media when I've been posting about this. I could do with doing more of that on Twitter, honestly, and probably on Pinterest as well. I should probably have a board for that. That's something that I could really do with being better at. But, well, maybe this next year is the time I start doing that properly. So until next time, you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a like. It helps the channel a lot. Intro and outro music by me. Copyright JBlack 2024.